There is a moment when every bourbon collector thinks they are completely normal. Maybe it's after buying their second bottle, maybe their fifth, maybe even their 10th. They look at the shelf, look at the growing collection, and tell themselves the same thing. I'm not collecting bourbon. I'm just buying bottles I like. Then 6 months later, they're refreshing liquor store websites at 7 a.m., entering state lotteries, and driving 3 hours, because someone on Facebook said a store might have Blanton's. And somehow, that feels completely reasonable. The strange thing about bourbon collecting is that almost nobody plans to become a collector. Nobody wakes up one morning and says, "You know what, I'd like to spend the next 5 years obsessing over allocated whiskey." It just happens. 1 bottle becomes 2, 2 becomes 5, 5 becomes 20, and before long you're explaining barrel proofs to people who never asked. Today we're following that journey. The 7 levels of becoming a bourbon collector, from complete beginner to full-blown bourbon insanity. Level 1. The accidental buyer. Every collector starts here, and most don't even realize it. At this stage, you're not looking for bourbon. You're looking for alcohol, something for a barbecue, something for a football game, something to keep in the cabinet. You walk into a store, see a bottle of Jim Beam, maybe Evan Williams, maybe Wild Turkey, and throw it into your cart without giving it another thought. To you, bourbon is simple. There are cheap bottles and expensive bottles. That's about it. You don't know what a mash bill is. You don't care what proof means. And if somebody starts talking about warehouse locations, your eyes immediately glaze over. Life is good, because ignorance is cheap. Then one day something dangerous happens. A friend pours you something better. Maybe Buffalo Trace, maybe Woodford Reserve, maybe Maker's Mark, and suddenly you notice something. This doesn't taste like the bourbon you've been drinking. It's smoother, richer, sweeter, more interesting. And for the first time, a question enters your mind. What else am I missing? Congratulations! You just unlocked Level 2. Level 2. The curious drinker. This is where the rabbit hole begins. At first, it seems harmless. You watch one bourbon review on YouTube, then another, then another. Suddenly, your recommendations are filled with whiskey channels. You're learning words like caramel, oak, brown sugar, leather, and you're pretending you can identify all of them. The truth? Most beginners can't. But that doesn't stop anyone. This is the stage where people start buying bottles for comparison, not because they need another bottle. Because they're curious. You buy Buffalo Trace, then Wild Turkey 101, then Elijah Craig, then Four Roses, and you start lining them up on the kitchen table like some kind of science experiment. For the first time, you're drinking bourbon slowly. You're paying attention. You're trying to figure out why one tastes different from another. And something weird starts happening. You begin looking forward to the experience. Not the alcohol. The experience. That's a huge difference. Because the moment bourbon becomes a hobby, the spending begins. Level 3. The shelf builder. This is where things get expensive. Not because you're buying rare bourbon, because you're buying lots of bourbon. Every collector remembers this phase. The phase where every trip to the liquor store somehow ends with another bottle coming home. Your shelf starts growing. 3 bottles become 8. 8 become 15. 15 become 25. At this point, your collection is growing faster than your ability to drink it. But that's okay, because you've developed a dangerous new skill, justification. This one is different. I've never tried this distillery. The reviews were great. It's a backup bottle. Collectors become masters of rationalization, and the industry loves them for it. This is also where FOMO appears for the first time. Fear of missing out. You see a bottle online, some reviewer says it's incredible. Suddenly you need it, not want it, need it. And that's exactly how Level 4 begins. Level 4. The hunter. Now we're entering dangerous territory. Because collecting is no longer passive, it's active. You aren't waiting to find bottles, you're chasing them. You know delivery days. You know which stores receive allocations. You know which managers are willing to talk. You know which Facebook groups leak information. The average person walks into a liquor store and sees shelves. You walk into a liquor store and see opportunities. This is where Blanton's enters the story. Not because it's the best bourbon, because it's the first bottle many collectors can't find. Scarcity changes everything. The moment something becomes difficult to obtain, it becomes more desirable. Psychologists have known this for decades. Bourbon collectors learn it the hard way. You start hearing stories. A store got 6 bottles. They sold out in 20 minutes. Someone waited outside before opening. Someone bought the entire case. And suddenly you're doing things that would have sounded ridiculous a year ago. Driving across town, checking inventory apps, calling stores, all for a bottle of whiskey. And somehow it feels completely normal. Level 5. The allocated obsession. This is where bourbon stops behaving like a drink and starts behaving like a currency. Collectors at this level speak a different language. BTAC, Weller. Stag. Pappy. E.H. Taylor. To outsiders it sounds like nonsense. To collectors it sounds like treasure. This is the lottery stage, the raffle stage, the relationship building stage. You know store owners by name. Store owners know you by name. You understand secondary market prices. You know which bottles are worth chasing and which ones are pure hype. At least, that's what you tell yourself. The reality is that nobody truly knows, because the bourbon world is full of bottles that are impossible to separate from their reputation. Take Weller 12. Ask one collector and they'll tell you it's one of the greatest wheated bourbons ever made. Ask another and they'll tell you it's a decent $80 bottle trapped inside a $400 market. Who's right? Both of them. And that's what makes allocated bourbon so fascinating. At this level, people stop buying bottles because they want to drink them. They start buying bottles because they might never see them again. That's a completely different mindset. A normal consumer sees a bottle, a collector sees an opportunity. And opportunities are much harder to walk away from. This is where many collections stop looking like bars and start looking like investments, rows of unopened bottles, backups of backups, special releases, store picks, limited editions. The irony is that many collectors at this level are drinking less bourbon than they did before, because opening the bottle suddenly feels harder than buying it. After all, what if you never find another one? And that's how many people accidentally spend years stuck at level 5. But eventually something changes, because no matter how rare a bottle is, there's always a rarer one. Welcome to level 6. Level 6. The Unicorn Chaser. At this stage, bourbon collecting starts becoming difficult to explain to normal people. You find yourself discussing lottery systems at dinner. You know release calendars months in advance. You recognize bottle silhouettes from 50 feet away. And somehow you've developed the ability to spot an allocated bourbon shelf from the parking lot. This is the world of BTAC, the Buffalo Trace Antique Collection. George T. Stagg. William LaRue Weller. Eagle Rare 17. Bottles that most bourbon fans have heard about, but very few have actually owned. These aren't bottles you casually discover during a weekend shopping trip. These are bottles people chase for months, sometimes years. You enter lotteries, join membership programs, build relationships with stores, and even then, you probably won't get one. That's the crazy part. The harder something becomes to obtain, the more people want it. Psychologists call it scarcity bias. Collectors call it Tuesday. And nowhere is that more obvious than with George T. Stagg. Every year, thousands of collectors hope they'll somehow get lucky. Most don't. Yet the chase continues. Because level 6 isn't really about bourbon anymore. It's about possibility. The possibility that maybe this year will be your year. Maybe this time your name gets called. Maybe this time you'll finally hold that bottle you've spent years reading about online. The hunt becomes the hobby. And for some collectors, the hunt becomes more exciting than the bourbon itself. But there is one final level. A level so extreme that even many experienced collectors never reach it. Level 7. The Bourbon Philosopher. This isn't the richest collector. It isn't the collector with the biggest shelf, and it definitely isn't the collector with the most expensive bottles. It's something else entirely. Because after enough years in the hobby, something unexpected happens. You stop being impressed by price tags. The first time you see $1,000 bottle, it feels unbelievable. The 10th time, not so much. The first allocated bottle feels magical. The 20th starts feeling normal, and eventually you realize something important. Every collector is chasing the same feeling, not the same bottle. The same feeling. The excitement of discovery. The thrill of finding something special. The satisfaction of sharing it with someone who appreciates it. The bottle was never the destination, it was just the vehicle. Collectors at level 7 start opening bottles. Even the rare ones. Especially the rare ones. Because they've learned something that newer collectors haven't. An unopened bottle is just potential. An open bottle becomes a memory. And memories are worth far more. This is the stage where people stop asking, how much is it worth? And start asking, who should I share it with? The obsession with rarity fades. The obsession with status fades. Even the obsession with collecting begins to fade. What remains is appreciation. Appreciation for the craftsmanship, the history, the stories, and the people met along the way. Because every bourbon collector eventually discovers a strange truth. The best bottle on the shelf is rarely the most expensive one. It's the bottle connected to a story. Maybe it was your first Buffalo Trace. Maybe it was the bottle you found during a road trip. Maybe it was the rare bourbon you opened with friends to celebrate a promotion, a wedding, or a milestone. Years later, that's the bottle you'll remember. Not because it scored a 98 on some review website. Because it became part of your life. And that's the final lesson of bourbon collecting. Nobody starts this journey intending to become a collector. Nobody plans on spending years learning mash bills, hunting allocations, or entering lotteries. It just happens. One bottle becomes 2, 2 becomes 5, 5 becomes 20, and somewhere along the way, the bourbon becomes about more than bourbon. It becomes about curiosity, community, stories, and experiences. Some people stop at level 1. Some spend their entire lives at level 5. A few eventually reach level 7. But no matter where you are on the ladder, remember this: the goal was never to own every bottle. The goal was never to spend the most money, and the goal was definitely never to impress strangers on the internet. The goal was to enjoy the journey, because one day every bottle gets opened, every collection gets sold, every unicorn gets poured, and when that day comes, the only thing left is the story. And that's what makes a bourbon collector.